Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Benzo Warrior Community Roundtable Zoom. Tonight, we welcome Jennifer Swantkowski, Ph.D., LCSW. We are excited to welcome Jennifer here as our guest. The name of her talk is Down the Rabbit Hole, a conversation with Jennifer Swantkowski, Ph.D. She will be discussing the narratives we form about our withdrawal experiences and how they matter in terms of our recovery. Jennifer is also a fellow Benzo survivor. She will speak for the first hour and will entertain our questions in a Q&A format after her presentation. Jennifer has her master's in social work, postgraduate fellowship in end-of-life care, and PhD in clinical social work. She has worked both as an individual and a family therapist, taught at several colleges, and worked in the area of borderline personality disorder. For the last 10 years, Jennifer has been in private practice, working with adults, providing individual and couples counseling. In her practice, she focuses mainly on professionals dealing with issues such as anxiety, addiction, and relational struggles, and young adults who are failing to launch in their lives. Unfortunately, due to a neurotoxic reaction to an antibiotic and subsequent struggle to come up with benzodiazepine prescribed for that injury, Jennifer stepped away from her clinical practice in 2020. During that time away, she is focused on healing, as well as heavily researching medication injury and the benzodiazepine withdrawal. She has written a book called The Waiting Room: My Journey of Recovery from Medication Injury and Benzodiazepine Withdrawal. She is currently working on a second book and creating YouTube videos discussing various issues related to benzodiazepine withdrawal, as well as a separate series called Therapy from the Sidelines. She is passionate about being a part of the advocacy and awareness efforts and serves as a member of the Medical Advisory Board for the Benzodiazepine Information Coalition. Please help me welcome Jennifer Swantkowski. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks for having me back, guys. It's always a pleasure to come in here and talk to you. So thanks. I appreciate that. I thought what I would do is start with just a little bit of my story, because I think what happens is many people know my story, but even people that have heard my story, I still get emails and questions like, what do you mean you had a problem with supplements? Or, are you kindled, or different questions that come my way. So I thought I'd just spend maybe 15 minutes, just if maybe even not even that long, just giving you my story in Reader's Digest form. So, as was stated, my journey with this began in 2016 with a reaction to the antibiotic Levaquin. I'd never taken a benzodiazepine before, other than to fly. I would take it a couple times a year, 0.25, to hop on a plane, and I never gave it a second thought. As was also stated, I've been in the field for 27 years and did not know the impact of this medication and psychotropic meds in general, but specifically this class of medication. I was as shocked as you guys were, and I have some feelings about that for my own self, but it's how it unfolded. So in 2016, I had this neurotoxic reaction that looked very, very similar to now what I know is a benzo withdrawal, what we go through in benzo withdrawal. And I think that is not an accident, because I think basically a neurotoxic reaction is what we're having as we're going through benzodiazepine withdrawal. The way I look at it is that I had an extreme injury, extreme sensitization to my nervous system. And I believe that's what I'm still going through now in benzodiazepine withdrawal. So to rectify this nervous system that was out of control, and I had everything from burning skin to insomnia to tinnitus to suicidality. And when I say suicidality, I mean probably what a lot of us go through, which is intrusive thoughts of fear, like we've lost our minds, we've lost the plot. I would have intrusive thoughts. I had depression, everything just within 48 hours of taking 3 doses of an antibiotic. And they gave me Xanax and gabapentin. And it didn't help right away, actually. In fact, I think if I had just stayed off all medication, I probably would have healed the same way. But it's, again, I didn't know. And so I stayed on these medications for a year. I was on a really high dose of gabapentin, anywhere between 900 and 1500 a day. And I was on a milligram of Xanax a day. again, at the time, I was being told these weren't high doses of either one of these meds. Now I know better too about that. About a year into it, I just didn't want to be on the medications anymore. All the symptoms had kind of alleviated for the most part. There were still some lingering things, but I said I wanted to come off, and they said, just come off. And I was like, I can just do that? Like, I can just not take these medications? They said, yeah. So I did. And I got incredibly lucky. I had very minimal, if at all, any type of response to coming off both of those medications in 2017. Now I know, in talking to people, and even talking to a friend of mine that's an internist, that people can end up in the ER looking psychotic when they cold turkey gabapentin, not to mention the benzodiazepine. So I just got lucky. I say I got lucky, but the problem is because I got lucky, I didn't know. I didn't know that when I had a problem again a couple of years later, and they said, well, gabapentin and Xanax, you seemed fine on those, we're going to put you back on those. And within weeks in 2020, my life fell apart. What happened was in early 2020, I had a very benign surgery. I had ovarian polyps that were benign, removed. It was not even an hour-long surgery. And I came out of the surgery and I didn't feel as bad as I had with the antibiotic injury, but I felt very similar, revved up. I wanted to go for a run, and I don't run. So that was strange. I felt really a little hypomanic, like just really like too much energy. I couldn't calm down. I couldn't sleep. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, the sparklers on my legs and the burning, everything started kind of coming back. And I was like, oh gosh, but it wasn't to the level that it had initially. So they said gabapentin and Xanax. So I did that. And I started with just gabapentin. I didn't feel good on it at all. Right out of the gate, I had a different reaction to it than I had the first time. And I was on it for about a month, and I kept getting sicker and sicker. And I was really dodging taking the Xanax. I was not wanting to do that. I don't really know why. I hadn't figured out how bad it was yet. But I knew it was a benzo, and I didn't really want to be on it. So I was on maybe, I don't know, 900 or 1200 of gabapentin for about a month. And they said, just stop it again. And I did. And this time, no go. Everything got 100 times worse, not being hyperbolic. So then they started pushing the benzo, take more of the Xanax, take more of the Xanax. And the more I took, the sicker I became. So it went from 0.25 to 0.5 to 0.75 to 1 to 1.25 to 1. We got all the way up to 1.5 very, very, very quickly. And I kept saying, I'm getting sicker. They kept saying, you need more, you need more. In fact, I was told, you might need 6 milligrams. And if you need 6 milligrams of Xanax, you need 6 milligrams of Xanax. And I would say, but I was fine. I was fine a couple months ago. Like, why would I need 6 milligrams of Xanax? So this is when it started to click into me. And this is when I found some Facebook groups online. I hadn't found this one yet. I found another one, and I found Benzo Buddies, I guess. And I began to figure out what was the matter with me. And it was horrible. I've been in the field, like I said, for a long time. Most of my friends are psychiatrists and therapists. And nobody believed that that a medication going on or coming off could be causing this. And so, I was kind of in the same place that most of us land, which is we're just trying so hard to stay sane and figure out what's wrong at the same time that we're trying to get our loved ones and our friends and our colleagues to believe us. And I had kind of that double whammy of like, I should be in a better position than most people with my own knowledge and having all these friends that were in the field. In fact, it kind of worked against me because it just wasn't believed. I finally found somebody who did not run in my circle of friends so that I could see them, and they believed that something had happened to me. They didn't know what it was. They'd never seen anything like this, but they believed that my nervous system was on fire. And so I began to work with them, and I still wasn't better. I mean, I had to give up my private practice. I couldn't work. I couldn't live alone. I had this beautiful high-rise apartment in Houston next door to my office, and I had to give all of that up. I had to move in with my mom and dad, who were in their mid-70s at the time, excuse me, and give up my practice, stop working. I couldn't pay a bill. I couldn't, make a potato. Like it was ridiculous. And I started the process of finding this one psychiatrist who said, all right, I don't know how to help you, but we're going to stop giving you medicine. We're going to stop. By this point, I was already on mirtazapine, 15 milligrams, because I'd lost like 30 pounds and I wasn't sleeping. I didn't know what was wrong. So at this point, she says, no more medicine. We're stopping everything, and we're going to go from here. And she ended up putting me on I won't name the company. You can email me privately and I'll tell you, but it's a form of nutraceuticals. So they're high-powered supplements. We're not talking like a vitamin D out of GNC or something like that, or a little bit of magnesium. We're talking 16 pills a day, very, very high-powered supplements that had upwards of 300 ingredients in them. I didn't know at the time. She had said this would help me in the taper. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know. I got on them. I stabilized. I didn't touch my dose for a couple of months. I stabilized, and I got to a place where I was stable enough to start the taper. And I started a water taper in June of 2020. I got all the way down from 1.5 milligrams of Xanax to 0.65 of Xanax in about a year. Let's just say roughly a year. And I went in for routine blood, and I was doing okay. I was only able to reduce about 7% a month. I was never able to go more than that. Things with the eggs would slide off the platter. I mean, I couldn't do more than 7% a month. So I knew it was going to take me a while, but I was okay with that because I was still not really able to work, but I was functioning. I was able to work out. I was able to engage my family. I was working a little bit. I was writing a little bit. And then about a year into it, I went in for routine blood work, and my B6 was in a toxic range. And the advice that I was given by all my doctors was, well, you got to come off all those vitamins. Well, the B6 was embedded in those 16 things. I couldn't just take B6 out. So to get my levels down, which were in toxic range, I had to come off these meds. And I remember saying to them, like, can I just stop taking these things? And they said, yeah, they're just vitamins. And I was like, well, are they really just vitamins? I mean, there's 300 things in this. And they said, yeah, it's fine. Just come off. And I knew better than to do it overnight because I'd already done this and my life blew up. So I tapered these over the course of a couple months. And I got the worst I had ever been by doing that. And I have understanding and reasons why. And I want to tell this part of the story because I've had a lot of people write to me and say, I'm afraid to take supplements, or I'm afraid to come off them. I'm afraid of what happened to you, but I can't endorse or not endorse you taking a supplement of any kind, but I can say that again, this was not me taking a little vitamin D or, vitamin C. These were high-powered nutraceuticals. And in short order, I'll tell you what happened. Basically, we have certain liver enzymes that metabolize our benzodiazepines, right? And it turns out that same liver enzyme that would metabolize my benzo was metabolizing the 300 things in these 16 nutraceuticals. So it created kind of a log jam basically in my body. And in essence, what that did was it potentiated the benzo. So I thought I was putting in, let's say, 1 milligram a day at that time. But my body felt like it was getting 3 milligrams because it was sitting in there longer because it wasn't pushing through, it wasn't metabolizing, okay? So it was basically like I was an ultra slow metabolizer of Xanax. It was just sitting in my body. Well, when I cleared out the log jam from those 300 other ingredients, it was like as if I went into a rapid taper. And I went into acute withdrawal, and that started in, oh gosh, maybe let's just say April, May of 2021. And I was in pretty bad shape. So I won't go into the gory details of that, other than to say that anything I had been doing ceased. I had to bring in some in-home help to be with me during the day. I was really sick, and I made the decision to updose. I'm not endorsing that. It didn't help. At least it didn't help right away. I don't know if it helped at all. I updosed in August of 2021, and then I sat still and didn't touch anything for almost 6 months. And about 4 or 5 months into that 6-month wait, things started to get a little bit better. I've never recovered from that last episode, and that's part of why I call this, and I want to talk about the narratives, because I call it down the rabbit hole, because each of my 3 experiences, they were different on a physical and mental level in terms of symptoms, but more importantly, the story I told myself about what was happening to me became different, and I'll get into that in a second. So I began a slow taper again in January of 2022. So I've been tapering now for another year or so. I'm back down to 0.62 after I'd gotten already there, up dose. Now I'm back there again. I taper very slow. Again, I'm not endorsing that, but I taper about 3% a month. I say it's what I can tolerate. I'm not really willing to take the risk of going a lot faster right now. And I'll get into my level of functionality at the 3%. 3% keeps me symptomatic, but functional. And I can live with that. I can't live with where I was. I don't want to put myself back into that corner if I don't have to ever again. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I still am on the mirtazapine, not touching it, try not to think about it, just leave it alone. And again, I'm on this slow taper and trying to just do all I can in my process to do videos, to share what I'm learning about medication injury, to share what I'm learning about the nervous system, to share what I'm learning about just my own process of going through this. What's helpful and what's not. And that's, many of you, I think, are already on looking at my videos on YouTube. But I think there's about 180 of them on there, maybe more now. And as was stated earlier, I wrote a book called The Waiting Room, which was like kind of my journey up to that point. I had a lot of people say I can't read. So I was going to put it on Audible, and just decided, like, I have the YouTube platform, let me just read it for free. And if anyone wants to listen to it, they can. I think I've gotten up to chapter 19, and there's been a little bit of a stall getting the next, I'll be doing that in the next few weeks, but I've had a loved one sick for the last couple of weeks. So I've had to put a stall on getting as much data out there on my YouTube channel. So that's kind of my story. Where I'm at now in terms of my level of functionality is, like I said, I'm symptomatic. And what I mean by that is I'm never without symptoms. And when I say that, I don't mean that to scare anybody, but I'm never without symptoms. So my mornings are bad. I'm glad we're not doing this in the morning. Usually things get a little bit better as the day goes on, sometimes not. I'm also in the middle of perimenopause. So that is another kind of 1-2 punch during this process, because if you've listened to my videos, I describe us as kind of tin cans, like we've been stripped of all buffers and all lubricants, and everything just hits our system so much harder, including the hormones. I'm working a little bit. I'm going to be going back to work. It looks like, at the end of the summer, not working as a benzo coach and not doing direct therapy, but working as a kind of like a supervisory role for a telemental health company. And it would all be virtual. And the person who owns the company knows my situation. So they know that it's a little hit and miss with me. Every day I just kind of deal with this. Some days better than others. Some days are not so good. So usually when you see me do a video or listen to me do a video, it's I'm having a better day or a better time of day. But I know it can be a little deceiving, and yet I also don't want to minimize that I'm grateful that I'm not where I was in the summer of 2021, and that 6-9 month period, whatever it was, it's all kind of blurry. So that's kind of my story, and I'm happy to answer questions about that when the time comes. But to get into how it segues into the topic that going down the rabbit hole and the narratives we tell, it segues in the fact that as I laid that out for you with, you know, my first entry into benzos after the neurotoxic levaquin reaction, the second one in 2020 when I can't tolerate the meds at all and they're pouring them into me, and that's when things really fell apart. And then the third episode in 2021 when they yanked the supplements and the bottom came out again. With each of those episodes, I had different stories about what was going on. In 2016, I knew nothing. I mean, if you read my book, I mean, I was being told that this antibiotic, you know, no way could an antibiotic do this to me. Well, in fact, there's 3 black box warnings that were in existence even at the time, that this is exactly what this antibiotic could do to people and did do to me. So there was a lot of gaslighting that happened in 2016, but I wasn't scared of myself yet, if that makes sense. And that's an important piece of this. I was scared. I had fear. I had terror. I was afraid of, you know, like, wow, oh my gosh, I feel terrible. But I fully believed I was going to be okay. I don't know why, but I did. And I fully trusted my doctors. So my narrative at that point was very optimistic. It was very hopeful. It was a little bit naive. And I think my naivete helped me not create a story of catastrophe, right? In 2020, when I have my second episode and things are going off the rails and no one's believing me. I'm being, you know, I think I was told I had caregiver burnout. I had fallen caregiver syndrome, maybe functional neurological disorder. I had maybe repressed grief or rage. I mean, it was, and these are people that knew me. And I started to look at it and think, wow, like once I got my mind back, I was like, wow, why is this so hard to say? Why are we having such a hard time saying, wow, Jen took a medicine and she blew up, or she tried to come off a medicine and she blew up. So that's where I started to that was my first entry into something's wrong here. Something's really wrong with the system, and something's really wrong with how this plays out for so many of us. And then when I got online and noticed that not only was I not alone, but there were hundreds of thousands of people, and those were just the ones that knew what was going on. And then I got to meet Geraldine Burns, and she became a dear friend, and I'm talking to her a lot and thinking, what's happening? I had no idea. Not just for my own self, but in my profession, I began to have this huge professional identity crisis. But the narrative I began to tell in the episode 2 was more of, I'm scared now. I'm scared because I don't know who to trust. I'm scared because it seems like everyone's wanting me to get on a million medications, and for something that they're telling me they don't even know what it is. And I'm starting to get nervous and scared. I'm getting on the forums, and the forums are simultaneously saving my life by telling me what's going on and by teaching me how to taper, while I'm suddenly learning more than I ever wanted to know about histamine, oxalates, salicylates. Oh my God, what could I eat? What can I eat? Oh my God, I better not eat a banana. It's going to liberate histamine. What if I was so completely overwhelmed at a time when I was operating at like 30% capacity at best. So the forums right away for me were both life-saving and also terrifying. And I began to get immersed in trying to read success stories. But I'm sure if you guys have done this, those success stories, you end up like clicking on the person's name and reading their whole story. And then that takes you down like 4 different like capillaries of suddenly like, oh my God. And so I would lose 8 or 9 hours and I would find myself just immersed in these horror stories. And I was scaring the heck out of myself. And I became afraid of food. I was just terrified. So my second entry into this was where my narrative becomes more skeptical, more cynical, a little bit more catastrophizing, definitely more distrustful, and lost. But I still pull it together, and I'm still hopeful. I'm still thinking, no, I'm going to be one of the ones that this is not going to be that hard for me. I'm going to be able to do this. The third episode is when I lost that narrative. And suddenly the narrative I was left with was one of just complete and utter fight or flight, pure and utter terror, pure and utter catastrophe. I didn't trust my mind. I didn't trust my body. I didn't trust a doctor. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust anything. And as I began to lose trust in myself, which was the hardest thing of all to lose, I realized the extreme irony in being in a situation where you have to be your best decision maker at a time when you're least equipped to make those decisions. And I still think that's one of the most horrific ironies in this situation for all of us going through this. But I began to I spent about a year in this mindset, not quite a year, almost a year of utter just chaos and hopeless, and literally losing days and weeks to reading stories. And my mind would jump from ruminating about people can't get off Xanax, I can't get off Xanax, to, oh my God, I'm on mirtazapine, look at all these horror stories, to I've lost all my friends and family, I've lost my career, I've lost my home, all the things I'd lost. I was ruminating on all the things I'd lost. I'd get some peace about Xanax, and then mirtazapine would scare me, and then I'd get some peace about mirtazapine, and what if I don't heal would scare. And I was just living in this state of rumination, catastrophizing, and my neurochemistry was pushing that. I mean, that's the other piece to this, right? Like, we're not making this up. If we could if it was easy for us to access hope and being realistic and being able to problem solve and plan, we would be doing those things. But unfortunately, the nature of this extreme sensitization that we're going through, the nature of this injury, is that logic and wisdom and rationality and hope and all the good fuzzy stuff is not accessible to us. We're really, for lack of a better way to put it, we're kind of living in a state of fight or flight, whether that's hitting you as an intrusive thought, as depression, as panic, as agitation, as burning skin, as your body, your muscles and your things aren't working in coordination. I mean, you guys know that there's well over 200 or 300 different manifestations, physically, mentally, cognitively, that we are impacted by this, because our nervous system, with our trillion, 7 trillion or whatever it is, nerve endings right throughout our body, plus our central nervous system that requires all of this neurochemistry to be working in homeostasis so that we can be active, engaged, rational beings. We don't have any of that stuff working for us. So I spent a long time in a state of abject terror, and part of that was organic. I was feeling all of that. But then on top of that, the story I was telling myself was, I'm doomed, and my chemistry wasn't helping me come up with any other narrative. I couldn't come up with any other narrative. It felt like that at the time. And so when things began to settle a little bit, I wasn't quite as acute. I was able to start to get out of my bed. Not do much. I could walk into the living room. I could maybe try to heat something up in the microwave. I could at night I could read and write after 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And as that began to kind of improve a little bit, I could read or write more. I began to really do a lot of the deep dive research that I do now on what do I do about this? Like, there's got to be something I'm in control of here. I'm out of control in so many different areas. And I'm sure many of you guys can relate to that. And so that began the beginning of my process of thinking about the narrative I'm telling myself about this. And if you've read the book or you've heard my videos, you've heard me talk about, like, one example, for example, is the Stockdale paradox. Stockdale was a Vietnam prisoner of war, spent a very long time as a prisoner of war, and most of his comrades who were also prisoners of war didn't make it. And when he came out and survived it, they asked, how did you do that? And it was a mental trick basically that he did. And he said, I didn't say things like, I'm not going to make it, but I also didn't say things like, I'll be better by Christmas, or I'm going to be home by Easter, because then Christmas would come or Easter would come and he'd be defeated and deflated. And he was watching his people do that and fall apart. So he just would say, I'm in hell. And I don't know how long I'm going to be in hell, but I'm not going to be here forever. I don't know if it's going to be another month, a year, 10 years. I don't know, but I'm in hell today. And so I know one day I'll be okay. Today is not that day. And so today I've got to figure out how to survive. And so I read that over and over again. And I began to think about, okay, each day that felt hellish, I would say, okay, today is not that day that I'm going to feel better, I guess. But so what do I have to do today? If I read horror stories all day, I'm probably not going to do anything to help myself. I'm probably going to hurt myself. And that became my other mantra, was I don't know of anything I can do to help myself, but I began to list things that would hurt myself. It would hurt myself if I read horror stories all day. It would hurt myself if I began to buy into the fact of what my neurochemistry was trying to tell me. My neurochemistry was telling me this was hopeless. It was telling me my world was distorted. I was distorted. And the way I think about this is now, and I'll come back to this in a second, the Stockdale paradox. But imagine the way I had to start thinking about it was, imagine somebody suddenly comes over and puts a paper sack over your head, and it's got a little tiny slit. You can see out in the world just a little bit, but you've got this paper sack over your head, okay? Well, if you didn't know you had a paper sack over your head, in pretty short amount of time, you would start to think, what's happened to me? Oh my God, the world, I can only see one little tiny speck of the world. Everything else, I can't get any other picture. I can't get perspective. I can't get any peripheral vision. It's hot in here. What's happening? The world looks weird. I feel weird. So I began to think, okay, it's like somebody put a paper bag over my head and I feel different and the world looks different. But what if I'm actually the same? What if I'm actually still in here? And I have to realize that temporarily, whether it's a day, week, month, year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it's going to be, I have to remember that I'm seeing the world and myself in a distorted manner because there's a paper bag over my head, okay? The paper bag being benzo withdrawal. And that helped me get a little bit of perspective and shift my perception a little bit to say, okay, this isn't me. This isn't the new me. This isn't the way I'm seeing the world. It all looks creepy and scary, and I'm afraid to leave my room. My bed had a rut in it from sitting in it for so long. Everything looks different, feels different. I feel different. I feel scared. I don't trust myself. All of the things I was telling myself. And then I could say, but it's because you have a paper bag over your head. And one day the paper bag is going to come off and you're still in here, okay? Not that we don't change through this process. We do, and sometimes for the better. In fact, many people say we do change for the better. I would agree with that, but I think it's hard to hear when you're in the middle of hell. So down the rabbit hole for me became the way these different narratives played out. And when that third episode hit and my narrative became one of utter despair, and catastrophizing and panic and trauma. I got sicker and sicker and sicker. And what I mean by that is my symptoms got worse, but my mindset did not allow for there to be any space for me to think I can get on the other side of this. I don't know when, but I can get on the other side of this. And since that time, I've really learned, and I really believe, and I know some people want to bop me over the head and be like, yeah, easy for you to say, Jennifer, as you're able to sit here and talk to us on a stream, but I want to say, and I'm not trying to distort anything. I don't feel well ever really. But again, some days better than others, right? But on the days that my mindset goes back to that rut, and it can go there. Like if I wake up, almost every morning it's there. I have to remind myself every morning, I'm responsible for my mindset. I'm responsible for my attitude. I'm responsible for the story I tell myself about what is happening to me right now. Just like Stockdale could have sat in that cage and thought he was doomed and focus on everything he'd lost. I began to think, okay, I'm in this cage like Stockdale, but can I focus on things that what's left and what's possible? I know what's lost. You guys know what's lost. You're living what's lost. What our mindset doesn't, what our chemistry doesn't really allow us to do is to think about, but wait, what's left and what's possible? So we have to almost like artificially build in a mindset, because nothing in us, we don't have the right hormones going on, guys, right? We're flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, and we don't have oxytocin working right. We don't have our dopamine and our serotonin. We certainly know that our GABA and glutamate's off. So all of our neurochemistry, nothing's really working to help us generate that mindset of like, we can do it, right? So we have to like almost artificially create a narrative that we can begin to believe in, which is another piece of it, right? To use to motivate us. And so, like, for example, I did a talk with David Powers the other day on his podcast, and we spent a lot of time talking about this because at one point during his situation, he would have to practice walking to the mailbox. And there was a many month period of time in this for me where I never even left my bedroom, let alone to go into the hallway of my, my apartment or to, and so my steps began very slow. They began with, okay, to try this for just a little while. And the other thing I talk about with David that I want to bring on here, in case you haven't heard that's part of this artificial mindset that we have to, again, create, because we're not being helped by our own chemistry, right? We're injured. So we're being kind of flooded in that fight or flight state with all the negative stuff, all the catastrophizing. And so we can't have this hardware that's corroded basically temporarily, and then ask that same hardware to solve a problem that it's created. We can't do that. We don't have that ability to do that. So we have to use something else. And I like the term willful tolerance. We talk about acceptance a lot, right? But sometimes I think the word gets overused, it kind of loses its punch. We don't really know, what does that mean? I like the word willful tolerance because I'm a big fan of Claire Weeks. If you listen to my stuff, Claire Weeks wrote in the 60s, 70s, and 80s about the nervous system. And quite frankly, I think if she were alive today, I think she would have joined forces with Ashton, and they would have been like the Australian British powerhouse to be able to help us navigate this crazy terrain of having our nervous systems basically, so raw. And so willful tolerance is, Claire Weeks would talk a lot about, you have to do things willingly. Now, she wasn't talking about people that were benzo injured, but she was talking about people that had agoraphobia for 20 years or panic disorder for 15 years, or people that were plagued with intrusive thoughts. And she was dealing with some pretty sick people. and people that were suffering. And so willful tolerance is basically, we are already tolerating our symptoms. You being on this call, I'm sure many of you are on this call experiencing a lot of symptoms. You're tolerating them. But to do so willingly changes the mindset and the attitude by which you approach those symptoms that you're tolerating, right? So we wake up and it's like, oh my God, burning skin's back, or oh my God, the depression's bad today, or oh my God, the world feels really creepy, or oh, I can't stop that thought. Why is that thought just plaguing me? Or I'm afraid of my bedroom because I have insomnia, right? So we have all these things, and then we can approach it from a fight and a resistance standpoint, which is, oh God, not again, not another day. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this. Or we seek out reassurance, like, can I do this? And we ask that for the millionth time, and hopefully we get, yes, you can, because you can. But we do all these things that basically add kind of fuel to the fire. And so willful tolerance is the idea of, yep, I have burning skin. Yep, I'm very depressed today. Yep, the world looks really weird. Yep, I tried to walk yesterday and today I feel worse than ever. Yep, I can't seem to manage to be around my family. Yeah, and I'm going to accept this with a willing attitude. I kind of hate the word attitude, but a willing narrative is how I'm going to tolerate my reality. And so that's why I wanted to come on and talk about these rabbit holes. And so we're not responsible for the first level of suffering that we get, right? First level of suffering is whatever your symptoms are. There's not much we can do about that. We can tweak things with diet. We can tweak things with moderate exercise if you can move. We can tweak things with tapering, how we want to taper, what do we want to do? There's ways that we can, tweak little things along the way. But I think this is, to me, the biggest piece of my puzzle was figuring out the narrative I'm going to tell myself about this, because I can't really do much about it. And in being able to do that, I've had to learn. I remember Geraldine telling me in the very first couple of months, she was like, you're just going to learn a crash course on how to be comfortable with being incredibly uncomfortable. And I was like, how does somebody do that? How do you get comfortable with being uncomfortable all the time? And the reality is we're all doing it. We are tolerating it. We are doing it. The question is, are we doing it willingly? Meaning this is what we got. I hate it. I think it was unnecessary. But that's a rabbit hole I can't afford any longer either right now. I can't afford the rabbit hole of this shouldn't have happened to me. I believe that, but I stayed there for a really long time, and all it did was breed a lot of resentment and anger and frustration. It wasn't helping me. There may be a day when I'm better that I can take that sentiment of this shouldn't be happening to me or to you and do something about it, which I plan to. But right now, that narrative does not help me. This shouldn't have happened to me. I have a dad right now that has cancer. I don't think that should be happening to him either, but it is. He's got to figure that out. We've got to help him walk through that. I think for us, and you've heard me talk about this before too, what complicates things for us is that part of our narrative has also been shaped by the secondary trauma of not being believed. And that's not a small thing. So it's one thing, like, for example, I just mentioned cancer, right? No one's going to deny cancer. No one's going to deny the effects of immunotherapy and chemotherapy. People are like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And what can we do? And how can we help you? Right. You tell somebody, yeah, I took this medication and my nervous system kind of blew up and I'm pretty incapacitated and I can't really be around a lot of stress and I can't really tolerate a lot of sensation and I'm not myself and I don't know how long it's going to be like that. And people are like, what? And that's a good day. Many people that reach out to me are people that have been told by their doctors, no, this isn't happening. Or you're a complete anomaly, which I've definitely made the invitation, like, hey, come online. Like, how could we all be anomalies? There's not that many doctors in the world that we could all be anomalies and be the one that has this. So the secondary trauma of not being believed is not a small factor in the narrative that we tell ourselves. So for a long time, the secondary trauma for me of feeling like some of the people in my life didn't believe me. Thank God my family did, but and some friends, but I had some people that really didn't. And having to fight from that place where you're so weak and you're so scared to be believed, that level of invalidation is, I don't like to use the word traumatic because I think that word also gets thrown around, but it is traumatizing. It was for me to be invalidated, especially at a time that I was so scared because every part of my body was failing me. So down the rabbit hole is just something I want to have everyone consider, because it's your right. Like, nobody can take from you. The one thing that nobody can take from you in this is your right to figure out the story you're going to shape about what is happening to you. Now, like I said, is that easy to do? No. And I'm not asking you to be Pollyannas and oh yay, this is the best thing. I'm so glad I got benzo withdrawal. I'm a better person for it. I'm probably never going to say that. It may be true at the end. I have no idea, but you're not going to hear me say that. Am I learning things? Sure. Would I have wanted this for me? Not in a million years. In fact, I would not wish this on my least favorite person. Not for a minute. Maybe for a minute. And maybe for a minute so that people could just feel what it feels like, right? Because it's indescribable. But it's an invitation to say, it's like Viktor Frankl, the guy who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, who lived through the Holocaust and lost his entire family, and he survived. And he went on to produce logotherapy, a form of therapy that's all about finding meaning in suffering. That he took his hell, and he decided, and he actually called it attitudinal values. That was the one thing that nobody could take from him. Nobody could take the value of his attitude about his own situation. And could he find meaning in the suffering? Again, this is not for me to say, again, some Pollyanna attitude about this, but it is to say, I want us to kind of find that little bit of space. And sometimes it's a sliver between, that stimulus and the response we talk about. Like I said, when I wake up and I'm hit with physical and mental symptoms that just feel like I can't do it. I can't do it. And I'll hear myself say to myself, I can't do it. I can't do it. And I don't turn around and become like the little engine that could. And like, I think I can. I don't do that. But I'll just say, all right. And I just put my feet on the floor. And maybe that day, all I can do is make myself lunch. Maybe that day I can do something. Maybe that day I can do something big. Maybe that day I can't do much of anything but brush my teeth and go back to bed. But I try not to stay in the I can't, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, because I know where that leads me. And mentally, it just destroyed me. And like I said, our neurochemistry is driving us there anyway. So we have to artificially, and these types of conversations, I think, or having like Benzo Warrior group, or having a coach, or having a friend in this that can kind of help you, because we have to kind of do it artificially, we need more help doing it, because it doesn't come naturally. It's not organic. It's not coming from us. We are literally putting it in place and saying, everything's telling me to be terrified. Everything's telling me to give up. Everything's telling me that, this is so bad, or it could get worse. And I have to artificially right the ship in a little bit of a different direction to see what I can do about this. And you've probably heard me say many times before, but it's one of my favorite quotes, which is, It's not when we no longer have symptoms, it's when the symptoms no longer have us. Okay. So I say that to myself almost every day, because to me, in my mind, in my world before I got sick, if I was going to be accepting of something or work on something, well, the goal was to feel better, right? So when I don't feel better, I think I must be failing at this. But I've had to kind of put that into my artificial narrative, which is no. Yeah, the end goal is I want to feel better one day. The reality is I don't want to add in layers of things that might be making this worse potentially for me down the road. And I want to, and I need support in doing that, because sometimes I just need reminders. But I think it's all, we have to be careful about how we get those reminders, right? Like if I get a whoosh of terror and all of a sudden some of my intrusives come back and I think, oh God, would I really do that? Would I do that? Do I really believe, is this me? What I used to do was, get on the phone with somebody and run it for the millionth time. And the answer never changed. And I'd feel better for a minute or two. And then the reassurance didn't stick. And so we look like reassurance junkies in this, but the reality is we look like reassurance junkies because it doesn't stick. We've got sticky brains for sure, meaning that we're ruminating and I think David Powers did a talk with you guys at rumination. I think rumination is one of the fundamental key symptoms in this, and it really drags us down and makes things impossible. So it's this idea of kind of creating these what are going to feel like artificial narratives about our situation and making sure that we're very careful about what we feed ourselves. Another piece of irony in this is like, I was so careful for so long, and I still am, but not as much, but I was so careful about like I better not eat a peanut, or I better not eat, what if, oh gosh, I better not eat that banana, or I better, maybe that was in the fridge for 12 hours, that could have histamine from being a leftover. I was, doing all that stuff, right? I was scared. And I'm not saying those things don't have maybe a little bit of validity, but my point is that I was adding so much fear. My world was getting so small and small and small. And so as I started doing research outside of the benzo world, because there wasn't much in the benzo world, right? So I started looking at people that had extreme anxiety disorders. We're not talking like a little nervous when they're public speaking or getting on a plane. I'm talking people that didn't leave their house for 20 years. I'm talking about people that had extreme food and chemical sensitivities that were down to 2 foods and wouldn't have electronics anywhere near them. I began looking at what's helping these people, because I'm more like these people, right? And again, in our world, we just don't have a lot of research. So I had to start looking at the extremes of these other people and what was working for them. And if you look at, for example, extreme food and extreme chemical sensitivities, what do you pull up? DNRS, the Gupta program. When you start looking at those programs, what are those programs? Amygdala retraining. What is our amygdala? Our amygdala is that little part of our brain, that little primitive part of our brain that is working our fight or flight, right? It keeps it's initially the adrenaline, then it moves into the cortisol, and that whole HPA axis. I won't get into all the biology of it, but my point is that when you look at extreme chemical and food sensitivities in people not benzo injured, the programs that have had the most success are training them to respond to their environment differently. So I'm terrified of all these things. Now I'm going to start to actually bring these things in, and I'm going to work on getting okay with fear that comes up about that. Okay. When I began looking at people that had extreme anxiety disorders, agoraphobia, panic disorder, DPDR, different manifestations, but I'm talking really disabled for a long period of time. What was working for them? Same types of things. Not necessarily exposure therapy. I guess it's a form of it for sure, but we don't really need to expose ourselves to things, right? Because we live, at least I do, I kind of live in an exposure state. I don't need to be like, well, let me go find something to be afraid of. No, I mean, I'm afraid all the time of almost everything, right? There's certain things more than others. Primarily, I'm afraid of my own body and mind. But I began to kind of put in place this what we call almost like an inhibitory learning model, which is in essence a little different than regular exposure. So instead of, like, let's say a regular exposure would be, I'm afraid of elevators for a non-benzo injured person. So I'm going to go in the elevator and I'm going to let myself get to that fear, and I'm going to let it peak, and I'm going to habituate to that level of anxiety, and then it's going to kind of come down. Inhibitory learning is a little bit different. It's saying, no, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm probably going to feel really scared, and I'm going to recognize that there's a difference between being terrified and being in danger. And so began to kind of work with that model for myself and kind of build that in. So the idea of willful tolerance, the willful part for me became, I'm going to tolerate these symptoms I have, while I simultaneously am going to recognize that when I can, I'm going to try to do some things. And my fear and my terror can't be my barometer for whether I should do those things. Now, for many of you, I get people say, like, Jen, I literally can't move. Like, I can't, I'm too dizzy. I have vertigo. I have POTS. Yes, there are those types of things that can absolutely limit you in a physical way, right? And certainly a mental way as well, but the physicality of it. So it may be a little bit different for each person, what you begin to bring into your picture. It might be letting a family member come and sit in your room and talk to you for a little while, whereas before you would just shut everybody out because you couldn't tolerate the stimulation and it was so scary or it was too overwhelming. So my point is I began to look at things outside of the benzo world to help me begin to think about what can we do to help ourselves. Because I also believe that, we have this injury, but I look at it as extreme nervous system sensitization, extreme. There's a spectrum, right? And certainly you get into things like akathisia and pacing and that type of thing. And you're at this end of that spectrum, right? People that are not benzo injured, but maybe are out in the world and they're nervous and they're worry warts, right? They may be on this end of the spectrum. I feel like most of us are somewhere pretty close to the tail end of it. And there just wasn't a lot, out there for us. But if we began to look at what other people are doing, we can learn from that. And that's what I began to do to kind of build my own little skill set, my own little toolkit of how I needed to understand what was happening in my own body and mind. That I had this extreme raw nervous sensitization, that I needed to practice putting in a narrative that was not one of catastrophizing, was not one of, I'm never going to get better. I'm going to be the one that doesn't heal. This is taking forever. I'm losing years of my life. All those things that just come naturally to say, I'm going to work on not saying those because that's my right. I have the right to not tell myself that. Nobody can make me say that to myself. Even my own neurochemistry, I'm going to artificially override it. And that's really what I kind of feel like I'm working on every day and it's an everyday thing. There's no part of me, I've had people say, gosh, you seem like you're doing so well. And I in many ways I am, but every day I'm working to override what my body and mind want me to do. It's like I'm being, pulled into this pit and I'm artificially putting in stop gaps to say, no, I'm not going down that hole. No, I'm not going to go down that hole. And I can still do it, guys. I mean, I can still have a bad day and be like, let me type in chemical terror and benzo buddies, by the way, for the 10,000th time. It's the weirdest thing. I get the same results. No one's really writing more about this. And so I get the same results, but it's as if I'm seeing them for the first time. And I'm like, whoa, so-and-so 54 had chemical terror for 4 years. And I'll suddenly get sucked into this thing. And then I want to read his whole story. And I'm lost. I literally will have lost a day of my life. And so, to think about what do we want to feed ourselves? That was the point I was getting to, is I was so careful about what I was feeding myself, literally. I'm not going to eat bananas. I'm not going to eat avocados. That, I'm going to watch my histamine. Oops, oxalates. What are those? Salicylates. Oh, gluten. Oh, soy. Oh my God. Okay. So I spent, all this time refining my diet, and I was paying zero attention to what I was listening to, my own voice, what I was looking at online, what narratives I was paying attention to. And so it's ironic that for me, I was getting so careful about everything. And I was so rigid about what I could do and what I couldn't do, and what I could try and what I couldn't try, and what was too much and what was, but yet I was letting myself just get hammered with scary stuff, scary stories. We can have the vicarious trauma of that as well, by the way, when we're thin-skinned going through this. And like I said earlier, we're like a tin can, right? So everything, for me, I feel everything stronger going through perimenopause. I don't think I'd be having this hard of a time if I wasn't in benzo withdrawal. So when those hormones fluctuate, man, that is a beast that there's not even words for that. If I'm not careful with my diet, if I'm not careful with my mental diet, what I can't help is the life stressors that are happening around me, right? None of us can really help those. We can try to navigate them differently. We can try to buffer artificially against some of them, but we can't really stop. I can't stop my dad from having cancer. I can't stop my loved one from passing away 7 weeks ago. And did I have a much harder time? Am I having a much harder time than I normally would? Yes. And that's to be expected. I think that's another part of the attitude, the willfulness, is it's to be expected that things are going to be harder. It's to be expected that I'm going to feel things in a distorted way, in a magnified way, because it's the nature of what I'm going through. So rather than be surprised by it and then hate it and I just have to try to remind myself. And then when I can't, I have a couple trusted people that will remind me this is to be expected. We knew this was going to happen. So anyway, I've been talking. I can just keep talking and talking and talking, but there might be questions, and if there's not, I can keep going. But I want to pause for Lisa or Barb to
open it now.
To ask any questions.
Thank you, Jen. I'm just trying to get my video on there. Hey, thank you, Jennifer. That was awesome. First, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and then for addressing some of the rabbit holes that we do go down, some of the common rabbit holes that we do go down, and then teaching us how to stop ourselves from going through that. So thank you again for joining us here at Benzo Warrior.
Thanks for having me.